Hello and welcome to Unacademy IAS English, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 7 important articles for a detailed analysis. There are 3 columns which are important both for prelims and mains and requires a holistic analysis, and few small articles that are relevant only for the prelims. So let's cover all these topics as comprehensively as possible. So if you guys are liking our initiatives, do support us with your likes and comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. And also, if you are interested for a free counseling session, you can enroll for a free counseling by filling the Google form, for which the link is provided in the video description below. If you want to know how to prepare for 2025 and 2026 exams, you can get in touch with our counseling team and you just share your details and the team will get back in touch with you. So with this, let's get started with the analysis by looking at this important column on page number 8. This article is related to the topic of election expenditure. So the article is very important for Indian polity. So first, let's understand the context. Why is this article brought out in today's The Hindu? See, US is headed towards presidential elections. So as US heads towards presidential elections, the topic of election expenses has come up in the news. So in this detailed article, the writers are helping us understand the topic of election expenditure, especially in democracies today. Contesting elections has become very expensive. In fact, the situation has become so bad that if you want to enter politics, contest elections, even in a democracy, it has become a matter of money power of the candidate. Without adequate money power, without your ability to collect money, arrange for donations and use that money to contest elections, you're not able to make a mark in democracy, in democratic elections. So this is a major concern for democracy itself, because this could create a vicious cycle where political donations come in from not only individuals but corporations and large organizations, and most of the money could end up breeding corruption and creating a vicious cycle with regard to election expenses and the corrupt nexus between political donors and the elected individuals. So this is a concern that affects many democracies around the world, including US and India. So according to data, in US, the election expenditure is estimated to be around $16 billion, which is roughly around 1,36,000 crore rupees. Now, if you compare this with the latest elections that were held in India, the 2024 Lok Sabha elections, the election expenditure was roughly put at 1 lakh crore rupees. Essentially, in India and US, the election expenditure is roughly the same. The election expenses reported in India has been roughly the same as being seen in the United States. This, of course, need not be the official numbers. These numbers are based on studies conducted by think tanks, which puts the election expenses in India at around 1 lakh crore rupees, while that of the US presidential and congressional elections which are coming up, the expenses are placed at around 1,36,000 crore rupees. Now the point is, where is this money coming from? Because this is a massive sum of money. So obviously one party or a few candidates can't generate this kind of political wealth. So there is political donations coming in from individuals, corporations, and several other entities. So this is what we need to understand. What are the sources of political funding? How does this influence elections and democracy? And how could this lead to a vicious cycle where election expenditure and political funding could lead to corruption in the system? As I told you, this could become an entry barrier for well-meaning citizens to enter elections and contest elections. So in India, if you look at election expenses, officially election expenses are capped by the Election Commission of India. The Election Commission has placed a cap of 95 lakh rupees per Lok Sabha candidate for larger states. whereas a cap of 75 lakh rupees per candidate has been placed for the smaller states. So this election cap, it is revised from time to time, depending on inflation, depending on the cost of publicity, campaigning, etc. So Election Commission of India has indeed placed a cap on the election expense, but this is only for each candidate. So if one were to contest Lok Sabha elections from a larger state, the current cap is at 95 lakh rupees per candidate for each constituency and 75 lakh rupees for smaller states. Now, if you look at legislative assembly elections, the state assembly elections, the expenditure cap is at 40 lakh rupees per candidate in the larger states and 28 lakh rupees in the smaller states. So now you might think this election expenditure limit is very fair, very reasonable. So how come the total expenses is coming up to 1 lakh crore rupees? If candidates are allowed to spend hardly few lakhs, which is under 1 crore for Lok Sabha elections and hardly around 28 to 40 lakhs for assembly elections, then how come the total expenses are being estimated at 1 lakh crore rupees? This huge gap that you're seeing is largely coming from the political parties themselves. See, the cap I mentioned right now is the expense limit for each candidate, for each individual candidate who has won the ticket of that particular party. So across various constituencies, there would be multiple candidates, right? But apart from what the candidates are spending on their campaign, the political parties as well, the recognized parties, they can spend on campaigning, marketing, and there is absolutely no limit on these expenses. The Election Commission has not placed any kind of cap or limit on the expenses incurred by the political party. So this party might be spending on the candidate as well. The party might be in general funding the marketing and campaigning efforts. These expenses are not capped. There is no limit on what political parties can spend in the country. And of course, political parties have to report the expenses. The candidates also have to report the expenses. But the problem is, only a small part of the actual expenditure is being officially reported. A large part of the expenditure goes unreported, which means that money is being used to illegally pay voters, to bribe the voters as well. A lot of money is being pumped by the candidates and by the political parties to bribe voters in various constituencies, and this money is not being accounted for. So if you look at Election Commission's data alone, it shows that all parties' candidates are well within the limits. Parties themselves have no limit as such, but the candidates appear to follow the expense limit set by the Election Commission. But in reality, on the ground, there's a lot of unaccounted expenses happening. Political parties, since they have no limits, they are funding the candidates as well, a few select candidates, and splurging a lot of money. And part of it is getting diverted towards bribing voters, which is absolutely illegal. It erodes the very foundation of democracy. It goes against the principle of free and fair elections, which is the bedrock of a democratic setup. So this is why political funding is a matter of serious concern. Now, if you look at the global standards, if you look at democracies like US and UK, even in these countries, political funding has been a matter of concern. Now, let's look at the US alone. Let us see how elections in the US are funded, what are the different sources of funding, what kind of limits and caps are placed in the US. Let's compare this with UK and then draw a comparison with India. So in the United States, political funding is mainly raised through donations. If you look at the current presidential campaign which is going on between the Republican and Democrat candidate, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, respectively, they are raising a lot of political donations, not only from individual voters, but as well as from large corporations, multinational corporations, private companies. And there's something called PAC and super PACs, political action committees. These are political entities in the US which are tax exempted. They can raise their own donations and fund certain parties and candidates that they prefer. So political action committees and super PACs are mobilizing millions of dollars in funding. See, individuals will never be able to contribute beyond a certain limit, except for few millionaires and billionaires. But companies and private organizations and corporations, they are the main donors, bringing in several $1 billion in funding. And the next big share comes from the political action committees and super PACs, which are these political entities allowed in the US political system that raise political donations for their candidates and their respective parties. In the current ongoing election cycle in the US, you might have seen how well-known individuals like Elon Musk have directly backed the campaign of the political candidates. Elon Musk has openly expressed support for Donald Trump's campaign and has almost pledged $120 to $130 million in political funding. So there are many such examples where large corporations, big companies, well-known individuals, they pump millions of dollars in funding, and you have the political action committees which are able to mobilize large amount of funds, again from individuals and corporations, and this is how the campaigns are funded. So out of the $16 billion, which is the total election expenditure being reported, around $5.5 billion is being spent just on the presidential election. The rest, $10.5 billion, is towards the congressional election. That is the election in the House of Representatives and the Senate of the US Congress. So cumulatively, a total of $16 billion expenses is being reported by the political parties and the candidates. So where is the money coming from? Not from the parties themselves, but mainly through political donations raised from individuals, large corporations, billionaires, and from political action committees. So in the US as well, there is a lot of concern about the unholy nexus that exists between the political donors and their candidates and the parties that they are backing. Because obviously the donors, they are not doing charity here. They might expect a quid pro quo. Once their candidates are elected, or once the parties they're backing win the elections, in return they might expect favors later, especially large corporations, big companies, and multi-billionaires like Elon Musk. If their candidates are elected, the party that they are backing comes to power, they would obviously expect quid pro quo, leading to a possible unholy nexus, a corrupt nexus, which could favor the donors, leading to erosion of democracy. So this creates a big entry barrier, because if candidates have to depend on political donors to even contest elections, then a common man can never aspire to contest elections in a democracy. Because where will they get this extent of funding? How will they get individuals and PACs and corporations to back them and their candidature? So a normal candidate, a well-meaning citizen, even if they have good ideas, good proposals, and a good heart and an intention to do good for the country and the democracy, they may not be able to even contest the election if they are not able to bring in the political funding. So basically, the conclusion is that contesting elections has become more expensive. It has gone out of reach for a common man, which leads to this entry barrier in a democracy. So this erodes the free and fair nature of elections. In the United Kingdom as well, elections don't come cheap. There is a cap of around £54,000. So cumulatively, if a party is contesting in all constituencies, the cap is around $35 million. So at least in UK, it's slightly better. Because in the UK, in its parliamentary election, there is a cap for spending, not only for every constituency, there is a cap for the party as well. Let's say Labour Party is contesting in all the constituencies. It cannot spend more than £35 million. There is a clear cap of 54,000 per constituency. This roughly translates to an average of 46 to 49,000 when the long campaign period is going on, which is around 5 months before the term of the House of Commons ends, and roughly around 17 to 20,000 pounds during short campaign, that is after the elections are announced. So in the UK, it is slightly better, as there is a cap not only for every constituency, but for the whole party as well. depending on how many constituencies the party is contesting in, there is a total cap placed on the expenditure that the party can incur. But in US, there is no such cap on the spending by the political party. In India as well, there is no limit on how much a political party can spend. You already know the kind of unaccountability that exists with regard to political funding and political donations. So this creates enormous challenges in a democracy. This could erode the very foundation of a democracy. The concern of the writers is that this possible nexus between donors and their candidates, between donors and the parties, could only breed corruption, establish a vicious cycle where only certain candidates and parties will be in a position to contest and fight elections. Because if political donors are so critical, when money power becomes important in an election, the political donors, they will play a critical role. Eventually, they'll end up deciding the fate of the elections as well. So for a common man to even think about contesting elections, it becomes almost impossible. Because from where will you get that kind of support? Not from few individuals, but from large companies, from the large donors, right? If the candidate is not able to mobilize that kind of funding, it creates an entry barrier into electoral politics. So this nexus that will exist between the donors and the candidates, donors and the parties, could lead to corruption in the system. Because obviously this could lead to a quid pro quo arrangement where the candidates and parties after coming to power might be expected to do favors to their political donors through favorable policies, favorable government programs and initiatives. They might be expected to return the favor, and this corrupt nexus establishes an elite circle, and this could erode the very foundation of democracy. So that is the main concern being expressed here by the writers. Now the writers focus on Indian elections as well. They take the research data from a think tank and they point out that during 2019 elections in India, during the 2019 Lok Sabha elections, the two major parties, the richest parties in India, the BJP, followed by the Congress, they officially reported an expenditure of 1,264 and 820 crores respectively. Now this amount is itself quite massive. But if you take the actual expenses, which has been reported on the ground, which has not been entirely reported to the Election Commission, the number shoots up to more than 50,000 crores. The amount spent by the parties, where there is no cap, no limit, plus amount spent by the candidates from their own personal wealth. A total of more than 50,000 crores was splurged by the candidates and parties, and the study shows that at least 25% of this funding was used to bribe the voters. Now you make the math, you calculate the numbers. Out of the reported 50,000 crores, which is according to this study, 25% of it, which is around 12,500 crores, was used by candidates and parties to distribute the money illegally to voters to bribe them, which is erosion of democracy. This inflated expenditure will only fuel corruption. It not only creates this corrupt nexus between the donors and the parties and candidates, but it could lead to bribing of voters, thus undermining elections. So then what is the way forward? If the problem is so serious, what do we do about this? So there are few committees which have provided some recommendations in this regard. The Indrajit Gupta Committee of 1998 and as well as the Law Commission of India in 1999, they submitted a recommendation on state funding of elections. So this is an ongoing debate in the country. Should the state fund the elections? Should we prohibit candidates and parties from incurring expenses because there could be a corrupt nexus with the donors? Should the state, from taxpayers' money, fund the elections, at least partially? Should the state bear election expenses so that there is accountability? So there are various proposals in this regard. As part of election reforms, which is being pushed by the Election Commission, even the Election Commission has favored state funding, at least partially, for candidates from recognized parties, where a certain amount of the expense can be borne by the state, which brings in full accountability and transparency. Because then this expense would be publicly available. The citizens can hold the government accountable, the candidates and parties accountable if this money is misused, right? So this is one of the recommendations which was supported by Indrajit Gupta committee. It was strongly backed by the Law Commission as well. But however, there are practical challenges in implementing state funding of elections. There are concerns on the feasibility of state funding. Is it feasible? Does the state have the kind of financial resources to incur this large expenditure to fund political campaigns? Then how do you implement? What should be the implementing mechanism? Should state funding be given to all the candidates so that it is fair? Or should it be only to certain candidates from recognized parties, which could lead to unfair distinction as well? So there has been challenges in this regard with regard to the feasibility and implementation of the scheme. And we haven't seen any further progress on state funding of elections. The other suggested alternative is simultaneous elections. One nation, one election. The idea which is being pushed by the current Modi government as well. Even Election Commission of India has backed the reintroduction of simultaneous elections. Simultaneous elections, when they are held, that is parallel elections to the Lok Sabha and the state assemblies, this could significantly bring down election-related expenses, not only for the government and the Election Commission, but more importantly for the political parties and the candidates. So this has been suggested as a panacea, as a one-point solution to solve the problem related to election expenses. But however, there are serious concerns about the proposal to implement simultaneous elections, because this would involve a number of constitutional amendments. This could even go against the principle of federalism, because the large parties, the national parties, could benefit from simultaneous elections, whereas the smaller regional parties won't be able to compete with the larger parties. There is also a concern that in case of simultaneous elections, the term of state assemblies will be curbed or extended, which could also go against the spirit of federalism. So because of these concerns, there's opposition against implementation of simultaneous elections. So this is also not seen as the most ideal solution for the problem. Then the government of India, the Modi government, introduced electoral bonds and championed electoral bonds as a solution to bring transparency into political funding. But you all know what happened with electoral bonds. The very design of electoral bonds was so opaque and non-transparent that it ended up facilitating corrupt funding into political parties, and few parties in particular benefited from electoral bonds. When recently the Supreme Court intervened and struck down electoral bonds as unconstitutional and forced the Election Commission to reveal the data which had been concealed from the public, we all saw how various companies, large corporations, had funded hundreds and thousands of crores to certain parties, favoring a few national and regional parties. So this corrupt practice was brought to an end after Supreme Court struck down electoral bonds as unconstitutional. So there are various solutions which have been proposed, which have been implemented, but none of them have given us a concrete way forward. So what should be done in this regard? That is the final question. What should be the solution to tackle the corrupt funding and ensure that political funding doesn't give rise to corruption and create that vicious cycle? How do we break that vicious cycle? The writer suggests to take a look at the reforms that were suggested by Election Commission of India in 2016. In 2016, the Election Commission brought out a report on election reforms, the proposed election reforms. There are few points which one should consider from this report. First and foremost, Election Commission should make it mandatory to ensure that the funding given by the party to its candidates is also included within the limit placed on the candidate's expenditure. See, I told you that a candidate can spend 95 to 75 lakhs for Lok Sabha elections, 40 to 28 lakhs for assembly elections. This does not include the funding given by the party. This is only the individual expense of that candidate. The party might have given 100 crores or even 1 crores or 10 crores for certain candidates. That is not accounted for. So one recommendation from the Election Commission is that, which is supported by the writer as well, the funding given by the party to a candidate should be accounted under the candidate's expenditure and it should be within the limit, which means the collective or cumulative funding of the candidate and the party put together for a constituency should not exceed the limit set by the Election Commission. This could significantly cut down political expenses, especially the large amount of money that parties are spending on certain candidates. So this could be a very good recommendation that you can suggest as well if there is a mains question on this topic. Next, there has to be a cap, a limit on the spending incurred by political parties, which is currently missing. As I told you, there is no cap, no limit on the amount political parties can spend. First of all, political donations are almost completely opaque in our country. Political parties are not accountable when it comes to their financial transparency. And as you know, most parties do not have inner democracy. And look at the irony of it. In a democratic country where they contest democratic elections, none of the parties in India are truly democratic internally. So you can't really expect financial transparency from them. So there has to be a strict limit on the spending of the political parties as well. Like how in UK, a party cannot spend more than 35 million pounds if it is contesting in all constituencies. Such a limit is necessary so that not only the spending of the party for a candidate is included in the candidate's expenditure under the candidate's expenditure limit, but at the same time, there should be a total cap on the expenses that a party can incur for elections. These two recommendations are honestly very, very valuable, something that we should consider to be implemented as part of electoral reforms. Another important recommendation is that to appoint more judges in the high courts, additional judges in high courts, who can take up electoral cases, election-related cases. Because if there are any violations of these norms and cases are filed, there will be a strong deterrent. The candidates and parties will be more concerned if they breach or violate the norms. See, currently, there is a lack of enforcement. Even if a candidate breaches the expense limit, right? Election Commission has been failing to hold them accountable. Election Commission has not been able to enforce the laws, and as a result, there are a lot of violations which are getting ignored. So right now, the judiciary is overburdened as well. So if additional judges are appointed at high courts to exclusively look at election-related disputes and cases, and if there are violations by parties or candidates, if those cases are fast-tracked and quick punishment is delivered to those parties and candidates, this can become a strong deterrent to ensure that candidates and parties stick to the election expenditure limit, which is set by the Election Commission. So such recommendations can be provided as a way forward to solve this challenge. So let's see what kind of question can be asked. In the mains exam under GS paper 2, or maybe even in ethics, because political funding raises ethical concerns as well, and or maybe even as an essay topic, there can be a possible question on this. So let's look at this question. I'll try to suggest a model answer, or at least an approach through which you can write an answer for this question. The question says, one's ability to contest elections in a democracy has become a matter of money power. So it's a statement, a quote which has been given. That is, one's ability, a common man's ability to contest elections in a democracy, it has become contingent on one's ability to spend. Where will a common person from a lower class or a middle class bring lakhs of rupees or crores of rupees to fight elections? So that is the statement made over here. Critically evaluate the statement by comparing election expenses in India and United States. Recommend measures to address the problem. So how do you approach answer writing for this particular question? In the introduction, you can present some data, maybe from India or maybe even from the US, to point out how expensive it has become to contest elections. Just suggest the broad numbers. You can point out that data shows that almost 1 lakh crore rupees was spent in India during the recent elections. Almost 50,000 crores was spent in 2019 elections, which is an indication that fighting elections has become about money power. So candidates and parties are dependent on money power to contest and fight and win elections. So set the tone, set the context, and point out that the high expenses involved. Express your view. Apart from presenting the data to substantiate your argument, express your view, your opinion on political funding. You can point out that high expenses, which is often met through political donations, could create a nexus between the donors and the parties and its candidates. Just give an indication that this could fuel corruption. Later we can explain this in detail. In the introduction, just give a hint that you believe that high expenses, which is mainly met through political donations, could lead to a nexus between the donors and the parties and candidates, which can breed corruption in the country. So this sets the tone of your answer, and you're clearly expressing your view, your opinion on this topic. Then in the body, compare the expenses that we just studied between Indian elections and American elections. What is the kind of expenses being reported? $16 billion in the US, 5.5 for presidential election, 10.5 for congressional elections. Where is the money coming from? Mainly from donors, individual donors, large corporations, and more importantly, the PACs, political account committees and the super PACs, the political action committees and the super PACs. They are mobilizing millions of dollars in funding, which raises serious concerns about transparency in elections and about the role of money power. Then present the data from India. You can rely upon data from Election Commission and as well as from any think tank to point out that parties and candidates are under-reporting their actual expense. They're crossing the limit. Parties have no limit on what they can spend. You can point out that systems like electoral bonds encouraged funding, non-transparent funding, which benefited certain parties, and we can see the corrupt nexus being present between the donors and the parties and their candidates. So bring this argument to draw this comparison and point out how election expenses are fueling corruption. Right? So you're remaining consistent throughout the answer in your views, in your opinion. Then finally, recommend the measures to deal with the challenge. You can suggest simultaneous elections, state funding of elections, 1 point each about the pros and cons, and then the electoral reforms proposed by Election Commission. The capping of limit on political spending by the parties, accounting political party expenses under candidates' expenses as well, keeping it under the candidates' account, and using the legal route, ensuring there is a strong legal deterrent by increasing the number of judges who can take up these cases, these violations, and deliver quick punishment. So 4 to 5 suggestions as a part of your conclusion is more than enough to bring your answer to an end. So this is how you build a structured answer and ensure that you remain within the word limit. So let me know what you think, and if possible, write an answer for this question and please post that in the comment section. Now let's look at the next article. But before I proceed, I would like to see if there are any doubts, any questions that the students have raised. Please let me know if you have any doubts, any specific questions about this topic. So keep posting the questions. I'll take a look at it later. Now let's move on to the next article. The next article is also very interesting. It talks about the fertilizer industry in India and how fertilizer shortage in the country is leading us to depend on imports, and how ongoing conflicts in the world has affected fertilizer production and fertilizer prices, which is impacting Indian agriculture. So that is the focus of this article. So let's take a quick look. See, Uttar Pradesh, which is one of the largest food producing states in India, has reported an alarming concern. According to the Agriculture Minister of the UP government, the state of UP is left with hardly 10 days worth of fertilizers. Now see, this is a critical season. We are entering the winter months. The Rabi cropping season just begins. So farmers have already started sowing the crops, which means there will be a sudden increase in demand for fertilizers, and the state doesn't have adequate fertilizers. It has a stock of hardly 10 days left, which means the prices will also increase and farmers will not be able to afford the expensive fertilizers. So this will lead the government to step in, give subsidies, fertilizer subsidies, which increases the expenditure for the government as well. One challenge we are facing with regard to fertilizer is that there is a global destabilization in the fertilizer market, because most of the synthetic chemical fertilizers are manufactured or produced using petrochemical products. Petrochemical raw materials are necessary to produce most of our fertilizers. So this is where we are facing a challenge. See, first of all, India's domestic production is very limited. We are not able to meet the domestic demand. If you look at major fertilizers, like for example, urea. Urea is the most widely used fertilizer in the country, followed by NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. Then you also have fertilizers such as nano urea and even organic fertilizers, which is being promoted by the government. We also have DAP, diammonium phosphate, potash, apart from nano urea, which the government has introduced, along with organic fertilizers. So variety of fertilizers are used in Indian agriculture, but the main dependence is on urea, NPK, DAP, potash. These are absolutely critical for ensuring agricultural productivity to meet our food security requirements. But the challenge here is that India doesn't produce enough. There is a big gap between the demand and the domestic supply. So when there is a gap, you have to meet the gap through imports. For example, we don't have any potash supplies in the country. We almost 100% import the potash from other countries. There is 100% import dependency for potash, because India is not blessed with the raw materials needed. So 100% of the potash requirement is imported from other countries. Urea, we produce close to around 80% of the domestic demand, creating a gap of 20% between demand and supply. So we match that gap by procuring urea through imports. Similarly, we import NPK as well. We import DAP as well. So there is a higher import dependency on these fertilizers. The problem here is that since production of these synthetic fertilizers is dependent on petrochemical byproducts, the oil markets and oil prices play a critical role in determining our ability to domestically produce them and the cost of import as well. It is entirely dependent on the oil market. But currently, the oil supply chain has seen a major disruption in the last couple of years because of the conflicts in Ukraine and as well as in Gaza. As you know, West Asian countries are major suppliers of petrochemical products to India. India has a lot of dependency on West Asian countries, from Saudi Arabia to Iran and UAE and Oman. We depend on many of these countries. They provide some of the components, the raw materials needed for fertilizer production in our country. Even Egypt, Jordan, they provide essential supplies to India, and the war in West Asia essentially has disrupted the oil market and oil prices and leading to shortage of supplies, which affects domestic production in the country. The war in Ukraine as well. Ukraine is a major agrarian power. Russia as well is a major supplier of the raw materials needed for fertilizers. So the overall disruption seen in the oil market and in the fertilizer market and in the supply chain has affected production levels in India. It has increased the import cost for India. Import cost has gone up. Domestic production has also been affected. So this is a significant challenge that we are dealing with currently. So let's discuss about this in slight detail. Let's see what challenges arise out of this, how we can overcome them. If you look at the current import scenario, almost 100% of potash or MOP, muriate of potassium, is met entirely through imports, because as I told you, we don't have enough potash resources in the country. We depend entirely on imports over here. So there are several countries that supply potash to India. Then when it comes to DAP, diammonium phosphate, which is crucial for certain crops, there is a 50 to 60% import dependency, meaning we are barely producing 40 to 50% of the requirement. So the remaining gap is being met through imports. When it comes to urea, the most important fertilizer in the country, the most widely used fertilizer, 80% is being met through domestic production, 20% is coming through imports. So this is the challenge that we are facing with. It has been highlighted even by the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Chemicals and Fertilizers. The Parliamentary Committee brought out a report highlighting India's import dependency, which creates a concern for the Indian economy. Because such external disruptions caused by wars and conflicts, or a disruption in supply chain, or a disruption in the prices because of volatile conditions in geopolitics, this could affect our import bill. The import cost shoots up. And also, it's not easy to procure the raw materials and components needed. And moreover, the challenges in our domestic industry is also placing a curb on our ability to produce required number of fertilizers to meet the demand that is present in the market. So this is the challenge we need to overcome. If you look at the demand-supply equation, for urea, there is a massive demand. Obviously, it's the most used fertilizer by our farmers. Even in case of urea, we still have a 20% import dependency. This is something we can easily tackle with right policies and initiatives, with right support from the government. The government can ensure we can increase urea production in the country to reduce our import dependency. For urea, we can become self-reliant, self-sufficient. 100% domestic production can be provided without the need for any urea imports into the country. This is something we should be striving towards. See, potash, we can't do anything. We don't have the raw materials. We need to procure it from other countries. We have a 100% dependency with regard to potash imports. But when it comes to DAP and NPK and urea, we can achieve 100% self-sufficiency. The reason why we are not able to do this is because there is a gap in our industry. The private sector is not getting the right support. The public sector companies as well, which produce fertilizers, even they need a push. They need more active support from the government. So these are policy-related issues which can be tackled. We may not be able to control global geopolitics. We may not be able to control the external factors, the supply chains, the prices of oil and petrochemical products, but we can definitely give a boost for domestic production. Achieve 100% domestic production, at least for some fertilizers, and import only what is necessary. The center is now spending a lot of money on fertilizer subsidy because of the lack of preparedness, the lack of domestic production. The center ends up paying the additional cost to reduce the burden on the farmers. Because I hope you know, fertilizer cost is a politically sensitive issue, right? Governments will be losing elections, they'll be toppled. Parties will lose elections if they don't impress the farmers, which is a major vote bank for them. So they come out with populist schemes announcing fertilizer subsidies when the fertilizer cost goes up, instead of using that amount in the budget to boost domestic production. Instead of creating the right capital needed by making the right capital expenditure, the money is being drained on populist schemes and measures to impress the vote bank, to impress the farmers, to reduce the burden on farmers. These are short-term ad hoc measures which will not improve our capacity of fertilizer production. This is something which should be tackled on an urgent basis. The fertilizer subsidy is a significant part of the budgetary allocation under the agriculture component. Now, if you look at the global scenario, the war in Ukraine and Gaza is unlikely to end anytime soon. We are importing from countries like China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Oman, Iran, and Egypt. These are the major suppliers, including Jordan. Right? These countries are the major suppliers of the petrochemical products needed for producing fertilizers. So, for some fertilizers, we will have a dependency. There's nothing we can do about it. But others, at least, like urea, DAP, and others, we can achieve 100% self-reliance. So this requires the right policy intervention from the government. Instead of wasting money on subsidies which may not be efficient, which could drain the state's exchequer, we should enhance fertilizer production, incentivize the domestic industry. There should be a big boost given to the private entities and as well as the cooperatives. There are many agricultural and farmer cooperative organizations which produce fertilizers, public sector companies, they need to be incentivized. This is what the standing committee of the parliament also supported. So if the government is able to work on the new investment policy that was introduced in 2012, we can increase urea production. The domestic capacity can be increased. There is some hope for India because in the last few years, we have seen significant progress. 6 new urea plants have been added under the new investment policy as far as fertilizer production was concerned. Over the last decade, 6 new urea plants have been added, which has increased our domestic production. Similarly, we should ensure we should become 100% self-reliant with regard to diammonium phosphate and NPK based fertilizers. Except for potash, we can ensure that we can become 100% self-sufficient. The other focus should be to adopt more efficient forms of fertilizers like nano urea, which has been actively promoted by the government, switching to organic natural farming that will reduce our overall dependency on chemical fertilizers. And we should also consider shifting our agricultural systems, our farming systems, to reduce dependency on chemical inputs. We should focus on alternate crops. We should diversify our cropping, our agriculture, to reduce the overall dependency on chemical fertilizers and chemical inputs. Because overuse of fertilizers, as you know, leads to serious environmental problems as well. It causes serious pollution, right? It can reduce the fertility of the soil in the long run. It could leach and cause water pollution, enter the groundwater table, leading to various diseases and environmental hazards. For example, in Punjab, the prime agrarian belt of India, green revolution and overuse of fertilizers has been linked with several incidents of cancer amongst the people in Punjab and Haryana, right? There is a direct link which has been established, a direct correlation between excessive use of fertilizers and the high occurrence of cancers in Punjab and Haryana belt. So we should keep in mind the long-term environmental impact, the impact on human health, and ensure that we reduce dependency as well, reduce the overall requirement on harmful chemical synthetic fertilizers. For that, we have to switch to more organic, natural ways of farming, carry out a shift in our agri systems, in our cropping patterns, diversify our cropping systems so that we reduce our overall dependency and increase the efficiency of fertilizers. So this approach is also necessary while we strive for 100% self-sufficiency for some fertilizers. This will make us less vulnerable for external impacts, such as a war in some of these areas from where we are procuring the raw materials and the components. So that is what we take away from this important article. Now, please take up this question. What impact has the conflict in Ukraine had on the global fertilizer market? It's a question on the entire global fertilizer industry, how it has been disrupted because of disruption in oil prices, because of the conflict in Ukraine, and what is its impact on India? Straightforward question. So let's see how many of you can use the points we have discussed and write an answer for this question. Now, before I look at the next article, let's see if there are any questions. Vishal Gaikwad is suggesting neem-coated urea should be used. Yes, neem-coated urea also increases the efficiency of urea absorption, so that eventually reduces our dependency on fertilizer. Roger is pointing out Sri Lanka's economic crisis was also related to fertilizers. Yes, Sri Lanka banned the import of fertilizers as it couldn't sustain the high imports and shifted the country overnight to organic farming. So that affected agricultural productivity and affected its exports. So we can't come out with such drastic measures as well. Sri Lanka is a classic example for that. Okay, so let's look at the next article. The next article talks about women representation in higher judiciary. The writers of the column are exploring a very important topic, a very serious, concerning topic regarding the lack of women representation in our higher judiciary. So let's explore this in slight detail. If you look at the data from our lower courts at the district level, compare that with high courts and Supreme Court. And if you look at women representation, there is something that is very striking, which immediately comes across. The Supreme Court of India published the State of Judiciary Report 2023. Please make a note. There could be a prelims question as well as to who publishes the State of Judiciary Report. It is published by Supreme Court of India. According to this report, at the lower levels of the judiciary, there is very good participation of women. At the district level, in the district judiciary, 36.3 judges are women judges. This number is quite encouraging. It shows that there is decent representation of women at the lower courts. In fact, in 14 states, if you look at the recruitment of judges for the civil judge junior position, almost more than 50% of the judges who were recruited, they were women. So women candidates, women aspirants have been doing quite well as far as entry into judiciary is concerned at the lower levels. But however, after they enter the judiciary, they are not able to retain themselves. Retention has become a problem. Of course, there is always an entry problem as well. Women, they often face a gender-based barrier to enter the public sphere, not just in judiciary, but across sectors. So there is an entry barrier, but recent data is quite positive that at least at the lower level, the entry of women into judiciary has been improving. The numbers are quite decent. But problem is, as you look at the funnel of promotions, right, from lower judiciary to higher judiciary, there is a significant dropout which happens. Number of women judges don't get promoted. They are often overlooked, and several women judges drop out from the career as well eventually. So there is a problem of retaining number of women judges in the system. So you see a significant drop when you come to higher judiciary as far as women representation is concerned. Supreme Court's report shows that there are only 13.4% women judges at high courts. If you look at the Supreme Court, it is just 9.3%. Did you know that we have never had a woman Chief Justice of India? Justice B.V. Nagaratna, who is currently a Supreme Court judge, is slated to be the first woman Chief Justice of India. If everything falls in place, in few years' time, Justice B.V. Nagaratna might become the first woman Chief Justice of India. If you look at Chief Justices of High Courts, we have had very, very few Chief Justices at the level of High Court who are women. Look at this alarming data. Just 4% of all Supreme Court judges have been women. From India's independence till date, if you look at the number of judges at Supreme Court, just 4% of them have been women. In the period of 1950s, 60s and 70s, there were no women judges in the Supreme Court, not even one. For most of the 80s as well, there were no women judges. Since 1989, we have had 11 women judges. And now one of them is slated to become the first woman Chief Justice of India. So this shows the stark underrepresentation of women in higher judiciary, in high courts and Supreme Court. Now, even if you look at different high courts, from region to region, there is a variation. There are certain high courts in the country where you don't have a single woman judge. In Bihar, for example, Manipur, Meghalaya, Uttarakhand, Tripura, Odisha, in several states, either there are no women at all in the high court or there is just one woman judge. In some of these high courts, even in Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, you either have no women judge or at least just one women judge. That shows the underrepresentation of women and the regional divide that exists as well. So why is this happening? What could be the reasons? The writers explore the different possible reasons. When it comes to entry, we have seen that the numbers have been quite encouraging. Women aspirants who are seeking to enter the lower judiciary at the district level, who are aspiring for the civil judge junior position at Civil Sessions Court, they are finding adequate options to enter the judiciary. But however, the prevailing social norms, the patriarchal nature of the Indian society, the patriarchal nature of the Indian society definitely has an impact. There are entry barriers as well. Maybe families are not encouraging enough to support women aspirants to aspire for the role of a judge, right? Even if they clear the exam, after they enter the service, immediately they are burdened with the family expectation. See, it is a reality that women still bear the unfair burden of being the primary caregiver in a family. So this expectation on women, which is an aspect of society, not just Indian society, but around the world, patriarchal nature of the society, the male-dominated system, places this unfair burden entirely on women. They are seen as the primary caregivers. So the primary family responsibility deters women from pursuing the career as well, which creates an entry barrier. Even after they enter, it becomes difficult for them to be in the system, affecting retention, because post-marriage, post-childbirth, several women judges are dropping out. They are not able to continue. Because of the unreasonable societal expectation and family expectation, there is a clear entry barrier and a retention problem which is getting created. The other problem is the lack of facilities, the lack of infrastructure, and also the lack of sensitivity in our judiciary to accommodate the unique requests of women judges. If you look at the judiciary, the court facilities, if you have ever visited a court complex, forget high courts. I'm talking about, let's say, district courts or sessions court. Most of these courts, they don't have basic infrastructure and basic facilities. They will have just one toilet complex, no separate toilets for women, right? So this affects the advocates who enter the bar council. It affects the judges as well. There are certain high courts also which do not have good washroom facilities, hygiene and sanitation facilities. So given the unique physiological requirements of women, the courts and the infrastructure, they are not matching up to it because it's largely designed with a male gaze. If you look at the committees which handle construction, which handle the facilities, it's all male dominated with no representation for women judges. The female gaze is missing. There is no involvement of the female judge while designing the infrastructure of a court complex. So the lack of infrastructure and facilities, the lack of sensitivity when it comes to transfers is something that affects women, and this affects retention. Sometimes women who already have the family expectation on them are transferred to remote locations. So they may not be able to relocate. And as a result, many women judges might drop out from the career. So you see this funnel effect as you move upwards in the judiciary. So at the lower level, there is adequate representation, but as you move higher up, where it really matters, the number of women judges are very less because many of them are dropping out. So the only way to counter this is not only to address the social issue and ensure there is more equality in the society as far as family expectation is concerned. The caregiving responsibility need not just be of that of women in the household. The men should equally pitch in, and this societal norm, right, should be reformed. But of course, this will not happen overnight, and government alone can't push for this. There has to be overall social reform. But immediately, at least to ensure retention of women judges in the system and ensure their fair promotion, what we need is improved infrastructure and facilities. Provide basic facilities like toilets, washrooms, so that the physiological needs of women is met, safety of women is taken care of, and ensure that there is sensitivity in the system when it comes to promotion and transfers. Ensure a fair level playing field for women for promotions, and factor into account that the family burden will remain on women as long as the society is not reformed. And this has to be considered by the judiciary while transferring women judges. Is that clear? So this is what we learned from this important article, and you can expect a polity question based on this. So now let's quickly look at the prelims section. We have few articles which could be relevant for the prelims exam. So let's take a quick look. The center has raised caution about Mule accounts which are being misused for money laundering. So let's quickly understand what are Mule accounts. how it can enable money laundering. The Indian Cyber Crime Coordination Center, I4C, which we studied yesterday, it functions under the Ministry of Home Affairs to tackle cyber crimes, online frauds, etc. It has raised a caution about the increasing number of mule accounts from India, which are being misused by transnational criminals to launder money. There are transnational organized criminal networks which are operating. They are involved in cyber crimes, online frauds, fraudulent investment schemes, etc. And they are siphoning off money from using Indian mule accounts, which is facilitating money laundering. So what are these mule accounts? Mule refers to this animal, right, which basically carries the weight, which acts as a transport or a transport mechanism for humans since ancient times. So when it comes to banking, the term mule account is used when someone else's bank account is rented, or basically the access is given to another person. Like a courier, for example. Let's say, for example, I open a bank account, I have a savings account, or maybe I have an organization which has a current account. I rent out this account for money for someone else. Or I allow another person to use my account to carry out their transactions. This is called muling of accounts. So either you might be tricked to give access to your account, or you might be convinced and deceived, or you might even be threatened. Let's say a cyber criminal who has gotten hold of your bank details might force you to give access, full access, to carry out a mule transaction using your bank account. Maybe the criminal wants to carry out a wire transfer of a huge sum of money to launder money. Maybe the wealth was generated illegally through cybercrime, through fraudulent investment schemes. Now, they have launched a cyber attack on you. They're holding your data. They're blackmailing you, threatening you, forcing you to give access to your account so that they can use your account to make the transfer. So their identity remains hidden. They need not open an account and go through the KYC verification process. And so without compromising their identity, they might use the account of another person whom they have targeted. Or they might incentivize someone. They might pay money to gain access to the accounts of other people, right? So this is called muling, where you're renting out your account. So there are shell companies which operate just for this purpose. There are shell companies which are basically fake organizations, front organizations, which open accounts in the name of the company and allow the accounts to be misused for money laundering, for fraudulent international transactions, so that criminals can make use of the accounts and avoid suspicion and conceal their identity and avoid getting caught. And such accounts which are used by criminals, others' accounts, they are called mule accounts. So these mule accounts are carrying the transactions of someone else. Just like a mule carries the weight, the burden, the goods of someone else. Similarly, these accounts which are rented, which are unfairly accessed, they are used for fraudulent transactions in order to conceal the actual identity of the person and the source and destination of the transactions. So this has increased significantly. Through various fraudulent international digital payment gateways, mule accounts are being used from Indian banks related to Indian customers. And those accounts are being used to channel laundered money and illicit wealth generated through cybercrime and organized crime. There are few platforms which have been flagged for concern by the I4C. For example, platforms like Peace Pay, RTX Pay, Poco Pay, RP Pay. These offer international payment gateway services. They make use of mule accounts, allowing criminals and foreign nationals to commit fraudulent transactions, including money laundering, to siphon money from India through Indian bank accounts, which actually belong to someone else. That is why you should never share your Aadhaar, your personal details with anyone. Because someone else might use your details to open a fake account and use that mule account to transfer the money. You should not rent out your account under any circumstance. What if criminals use your account to commit such fraudulent transactions? So you should never get incentivized or duped or tricked. Even if you're a victim of a cyber attack, if you're being threatened to give up your account. So the criminals can misuse it for transactions. You should immediately approach the police. You should file a complaint by calling 1930, which is a dedicated helpline for cyber crimes set up by the Home Ministry. You should report the cybercrime on the National Cybercrime Reporting Portal. Is that clear? So that is what we learned from this important article. Next, on page 12, Justice K S Puttaswamy, a legendary figure in the field of judiciary, has passed away. Justice K S Puttaswamy was the former High Court judge of Karnataka and made an enormous contribution to Indian judiciary and fundamental rights in particular. Today, if right to privacy is a fundamental right, we need to thank Justice K S Puttaswamy. It was Justice K S Puttaswamy who challenged Aadhaar on the grounds that it violated privacy of the citizens, which is a fundamental right. So even though Aadhaar was upheld as constitutional, in the K S Puttaswamy case in 2017, the Supreme Court declared, a constitution bench of Supreme Court declared right to privacy as a fundamental right that stems from Article 21. So today, if digital privacy is also seen as part of right to privacy, which is a fundamental right, and this led to the data protection law, one should be thankful to Justice K S Puttaswamy for leading this fight. In fact, Justice K S Puttaswamy became a popular activist post-retirement. It was because of his effort, his petitions and legal effort, that adultery was abolished as a crime. Adultery in India was treated as a criminal offense, and it was because of K S Puttaswamy's legal battle that we saw the abolition of adultery as a crime. So one needs to pay tribute to the contribution of Justice K S Puttaswamy, especially his efforts in getting right to privacy recognized as a fundamental right under Article 21. Next, on the same page, we have an article referring to important protected areas. The article refers to the Simplipal Tiger Reserve in Odisha. Odisha is planning to relocate few tigers by working with the neighboring state of Maharashtra. See, in Odisha, especially in Simplipal, there is a growing concern that due to inbreeding of tigers, the genetic diversity is being lost. You can already see the impact of this due to a lot of inbreeding amongst the related or genetically related tigers. The genetic diversity has been compromised, leading to genetic disorders. For example, the popular black tiger, which is often spotted in Simplipal, right? There are several such black-coated tigers, right? These are basically a result of pseudo-melanistic genetic traits, which is a result of genetic inbreeding. So Odisha is taking measures along with the National Tiger Conservation Authority to introduce more genetic diversity and to tackle the problem of inbreeding of the same genetically related tigers by relocating tigers from Maharashtra's Tadoba-Andhari Tiger Reserve. So that is the news article. So you need to know where Simplipal and Tadoba-Andhari Tiger Reserve is located. The Simplipal National Park and Tiger Reserve is a major habitat in Odisha. It is also part of UNESCO's Man and Biosphere Reserve program. It's one of the biosphere reserves in the country recognized under UNESCO's World Network of Biosphere Reserve program. It is home to the red silk cotton tree, after which the name is derived from. Simplipal refers to the red silk cotton tree, which is native to this part of Mayurbhanj district in Odisha. It is home to several threatened species, including the tigers and as well as the elephant, gaur, the chausinga and the others. Coming to Tadoba-Andhari Tiger Reserve in Maharashtra, it's one of the oldest and even the largest national park in Maharashtra. So this protected area is also home to tigers and several other threatened species. Now coming to the last article for today. On page 14, we have an article referring to a terrorist attack in West Africa carried out by a terror group called Boko Haram. Boko Haram has carried out a major attack in Chad along the borders of Nigeria and Chad, where more than 40 people have been killed. The attack was on an army camp of the Chadian army. So you should know what is Boko Haram. It's a terrorist outfit based out of West Africa, primarily Nigeria. It operates in northeast region of Nigeria and it also has a presence in the neighboring countries of Niger, Chad, Cameroon, and even Mali. So in West Africa, Al-Qaeda had created a strong presence, and Boko Haram was seen as one of the factions of Al-Qaeda. But recently, Boko Haram has shifted its allegiance to Islamic State. The ISIS has tried to set up a so-called Islamic State in West African province. This is seen as the regional faction of Islamic State. And Boko Haram is leading the radical ideology of Islamic State, engaging in violent terror attacks. It is this terror group which attacks even school-going children, as it opposes girl education. It's often known to attack schools, kidnap the girl children as well, and it carries out several attacks in Nigeria and as well as in Niger and Chad, especially in the border areas over here near northeast Nigeria. So this is what you need to know if at all there is a possible prelims question on this topic. So on this note, I complete my discussion for today. So I hope you guys have understood all the topics. So do let me know if you liked the session by pressing the like button, and express your feedback through your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. That is it for today. Let's see you tomorrow at the same time. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.